My mother's baptismal name is Elena. She is an ordinary nun at St. Mary's Monastery in the mountains of Idaho. She has endured all the hardships the mortal world has to offer, those she could bear and those she couldn't. When I was a child, I secretly thought, she must have committed a terrible sin in her past life, otherwise why would fate treat her so harshly? But fate seemed unsatisfied, it even took me, her only daughter, away at an early age. My name is Ella White. I was born into an ordinary working-class family. My mother used to be a homeroom teacher at an elementary school in Boise. Her voice was gentle, and her handwriting on the blackboard was neat and beautiful. My father worked on a construction crew, rarely returning home, and when he did, he was mostly drunk. As far back as I can remember, the most common sound in our house was my mother's suppressed sighs. It seemed like everything in life, daily necessities, my father's late nights, a student's mischief, was a mountain pressing down on her, heavy and inescapable. On a winter night when I was 6, I was woken by loud quarrels in the living room. Cold moonlight seeped through the gaps in the curtains, illuminating the scattered shards of glass on the floor. I peeked through the bedroom door crack and saw my father with red eyes, holding a wooden chair and swinging it fiercely toward my mother. She huddled in the corner of the sofa, hands covering her head, not crying or dodging, just trembling all over. My father's eyes were strange and terrifying, a mix of anger, disgust, and violence I had never seen on his face before. I was so scared that I shrank back into bed, covering my head with the quilt and shaking uncontrollably. The insults, the sound of things breaking, and my mother's restrained sobs intertwined like a blunt knife, cutting at my heart little by little. I don't know how long it took for the noises to fade away, followed by the sound of a door opening and closing. My father left, and never came back. The sun rose as usual the next day, and golden light filled the room, but it couldn't dispel the chill in the air. I saw my mother sitting at the dining table, her face covered with bruises, dry blood caked at the corner of her mouth. Yet she still did as usual, fry me bacon and eggs, and heated milk. "Ella, hurry up and eat, you'll be late for school." Her voice was hoarse, but still as gentle as ever. She walked me to the school gate, bent down to kiss my forehead, and the roughness of her fingertips stung a little. That afternoon, when the school bell rang, I waited at the gate for a long time. Even after the last classmate was picked up, my mother didn't come. I saw her again in the intensive care unit of St. Luke's Hospital. She lay in the hospital bed, covered with tubes, most of her bruises hidden by bandages, her breathing so weak that her chest barely rose and fell. I heard my grandmother crying by the bed, cursing the father who had left and never returned, calling him heartless, calling him a beast. Half a month later, my mother was discharged from the hospital. She took me back to our old house, packed a simple suitcase, and we moved into my grandmother's house. My grandmother's small house was in the suburbs of Boise, with only 2 rooms, but it was much warmer than our previous home. The days that followed were plain and peaceful. My mother no longer sighed. She accompanied my grandmother to buy groceries, cook, and take walks every day, and a faint smile occasionally appeared on her face. I also grew from a timid 6-year-old girl to a 9-year-old, with pigtails and a school bag, skipping to school every day. That day after school, as soon as I walked to my grandmother's door, I saw a strange middle-aged man standing there. He was wearing a faded flannel shirt, his hair gray, his face covered with wrinkles, his eyes cloudy yet staring straight at me with an indescribable emotion. "Little Ella, isn't it? Come here, let Grandpa take a look." He stretched out his hand toward me, his voice hoarse. I froze. His face was both unfamiliar and familiar, as if I had seen it in an old photo hidden at the bottom of my mother's drawer. In that photo, the man was young and upright, holding my mother and grandmother, smiling happily. But the man in front of me was completely different. My teacher had said to avoid hugs from strangers, so I stepped aside, quickly ran back to my room, and closed the door behind me. Pressing my ear against the door, I heard the voices in the living room change from calm greetings to fierce quarrels. My grandmother's cries, the man's excuses, and my mother's persuasion mixed together in chaos. Finally, all the sounds faded, leaving only my grandmother's suppressed sobs. It was another familiar hospital, but this time, the person lying in the bed was my grandfather. He was seriously ill and needed a huge sum of medical expenses. I heard my grandmother crying and scolding in the corridor, scolding him for being cruel, for abandoning his wife and daughter for more than 20 years, and now returning with a body full of illnesses to burden them. My mother quit her job as a teacher and took several part-time jobs, washing dishes in a restaurant, working as a cashier in a supermarket, doing housekeeping. She left early and returned late every day just to raise money for my grandfather's medical bills. I rarely saw her, occasionally waking up in the middle of the night. I would find her sitting under the desk lamp in the living room, mending tattered clothes, her eyes bloodshot. Time passed quickly, and in the blink of an eye, I entered the 7th grade. The passage of time had inevitably left traces on my mother's face. Fine lines appeared at the corners of her eyes, and a few strands of silver hair dotted her head. That day, I was daydreaming in class, listening to the rustle of poplar leaves outside the window, when the homeroom teacher gently tapped my desk and told me to go out to answer a phone call. It was the hospital calling, saying my grandmother had fainted. I grabbed my school bag and ran to the hospital as fast as I could. Running through crowded streets and into the hospital lobby filled with the smell of disinfectant, I saw my mother in the queue at the payment window. She was wearing a faded blue work uniform, hunched over, her thin figure looking particularly small among the crowd, like a fluttering dandelion, ready to be blown away by the wind at any moment. At that moment, I suddenly realized that my mother's back could no longer straighten up. The hands that once held chalk to write through spring and autumn were now covered with thick calluses, rough and chapped. My grandmother's test results came out: leukemia. This unfamiliar term struck our family like a bolt of lightning, leaving us unprepared. In the hospital stairwell, I heard my mother cry for the first time. It was not a restrained sob, but a heart-wrenching, gut-wrenching wail, as if she wanted to pour out all the grievances, pain, and despair of these years. She squatted on the stairs, hands covering her head, shoulders trembling violently, crying like a helpless child. My mother sent me to live with Aunt Martha. Aunt Martha was my mother's former colleague at school, kind-hearted, unmarried, and childless. Her students were her whole world. Every day after school, Aunt Martha would take me to the hospital to visit my mother, as well as my grandfather and grandmother in the hospital beds. My mother always forced a smile, told me interesting stories about the hospital, and bought me my favorite chocolate cookies, but I could clearly see the exhaustion and despair in her eyes. Before the final exams came, the death knells for my grandmother and grandfather rang first. In just 1 month, I lost 2 relatives one after another. My mother held my hand and placed 2 bouquets of white daisies at the suburban cemetery. Her hands were cold, full of calluses, rough like old tree bark. The wind was strong that day, messing up her hair and reddening her eyes. Shortly after handling the funeral arrangements, my mother told me that she was going to enter St. Mary's Monastery to practice. I didn't cry or object, I just nodded. I knew she was too tired to stay in the mortal world for even 1 more second. All those years, she had shouldered all the hardships alone, never complaining, never giving up on me. But after everything settled, she chose to convert to God, escaping this red dust that had left her covered in scars. On the day she left, she held me and apologized for a long time. "Ella, I'm sorry I can't be with you as you grow up. I'm sorry I couldn't give you a complete family. I'm sorry I'm so cowardly that I can only choose to escape." Her voice choked, and tears soaked my shoulders. I gently patted her back and silently thought, "Mom, you haven't let anyone down, except yourself. My name is Ella White, and this is my 15th birthday." The dandelions at the foot of the mountain are in full bloom, their white fluff swaying in the wind like little dreams. I picked a few and carefully put them into a small basket, planning to give them to the young monk in the monastery. "Ella, why did you take so long? The abbess will soon find out I sneaked out." The young monk was squatting by a big rock at the foot of the monastery mountain. When he saw me, he jumped up immediately. He was only 9 years old, with a round face, big eyes, a bald head, and a grey monk's robe. He looked very cute. Panting heavily, I handed him the small basket I had carefully protected. "Phew, I'm exhausted. There was a car accident on the way here, and we were stuck in traffic for a long time. I got out of the car and ran here." The young monk couldn't wait to open the blue cloth on the basket. When he saw the intact dandelions inside, he immediately smiled brightly. "Wow. Are these for me? Dandelions without fluff. I pinched his chubby cheek and nodded with a smile. Yes, they are for you, your favorite. Can you forgive me for being late now? A 9-year-old monk is easy to please. He immediately forgot his previous dissatisfaction. Today I secretly took pumpkin pies from the kitchen. As usual, one for you and one for Sister Elena, he said, pulling an oil paper bag from his arms like a treasure and handing it to me. The young monk frowned and looked at me with disgust. Ella, I don't eat pumpkin. You know that. I laughed even harder than before, picked up a pumpkin pie from the oil paper bag, took a big bite, and said vaguely, oh, what a pity, then your share is mine. You're cheating. The young monk put down the basket and chased after me to hit me. I ate the pie while running and teasing him, until the breeze brushed my cheeks, bringing the coolness of the mountains. He suddenly remembered he had sneaked out, stopped, stuck out his tongue at me, and said, just you wait, I'll make you cry next time. With that, he picked up the small basket and ran up the mountain in a flash. After saying goodbye to the young monk, I gobbled up the remaining pie and walked along the familiar path to the stream at the back of the monastery. There was a huge rock here. Hiding behind it, I could just see the back door of the kitchen. I watched as the young monk carefully hid the dandelions in his arms, hopped to the kitchen door, and handed the small basket to Sister Elena, who had just walked out of the kitchen. The nun was wearing a grey monk's robe, her hair neatly combed and held in place with a wooden hairpin, a faint smile on her face. As usual, she reached out and gently tapped the young monk on the head, taking the small basket. The sun shone on her, outlining a soft silhouette. The sorrow that once clouded her brows was gone, replaced only by the calm and tranquility precipitated by time. This was the 3rd year for both the young monk and me, and also the 3rd year with Sister Elena. Since my mother entered the monastery, I have come like this every week, making vegetarian food or snacks with my own hands and asking the young monk to take them to my mother, who is in charge of the monastery's meals. At first, the young monk would ask every time, why do you only make them for Sister Elena? Isn't the abbess nice? Isn't Sister Margaret nice? Later, he stopped asking, because every time I would deliberately make an extra portion of his favorite snacks to keep him quiet. Watching my mother return to the kitchen, I also turned around and walked down the mountain. I had been in a hurry on the way up, but on the way down, I could walk leisurely. The monastery was bustling with incense. No matter what time it was, there were endless believers on the mountain road. Some looked hurried, some looked worried, some looked devout and solemn. I often wondered, what exactly are they praying for? Success in studies or career? A happy marriage and harmonious family? Or good health and freedom from illness? Actually, for me, health is enough. I ran down the mountain. It was time to go back. Aunt Martha's weekends were usually filled with students. She devoted all her energy to teaching. But today was different. The house was unusually quiet, no laughter from students, no rustle of pens on paper. I pushed the door open and saw Aunt Martha sitting on the sofa, her face serious, brows furrowed, holding a white medical test report in her hand. Aunt Martha, what's wrong? No students came for tutoring today. I put down my school bag and sat next to her. Aunt Martha seemed to snap out of her daze, stood up, and hugged me without a word. Her embrace was warm, but with a faint, imperceptible tremor. I raised my hand to pat her back and asked as expected, did my test results come out? How is it, are they very bad? She nodded gently on my shoulder, then let me go, wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes, and said hoarsely, Ella, it's leukemia, just like your grandmother. I smiled, a relieved smile. Among all the terrible diseases, fate seemed to favor me specially, choosing the same illness as my grandmother. I pulled Aunt Martha to sit down, held her hand, and said seriously, Aunt Martha, thank you. In the 3 years since my mother left, you have raised me like your own daughter, never willing to hit or scold me. I know that. But this time, I don't want to burden you, nor do I want to burden her far up the mountain. Tears streamed down Aunt Martha's face endlessly. She opened her mouth to say something, but I interrupted her. Aunt Martha, let me finish. When I was a child, I watched my father beat my mother at home, seeing her covered in bruises, but I couldn't do anything. When I grew up, my grandfather and grandmother both fell seriously ill. My mother worked 4 or 5 jobs, barely sleeping, and I still couldn't do anything. Now I'm a freshman in high school, 15 years old. I go to see her every week, watching her go from an awkward new nun in the monastery to a respected senior nun today, watching her go from the sorrowful Mrs. White to the smiling Sister Elena. I'm really happy. She never gave up on me during the hardest times, but chose to convert to God after everything was over. She was really tired. I'm her daughter, I never helped her at all. This time, let me make my own decision, okay? Aunt Martha didn't say anything, she just held me tightly and cried for a long time. She was a kind people's teacher, and also an aunt who truly loved me. And in her arms, I felt the last warmth in this world. I think I really had a fate with hospital beds. The last part of my life was also spent in the hospital. By my bedside was Aunt Martha, who never left me. Outside the window was the bright sunshine, shining on my body and face, especially warm. I was so thin that I was just skin and bones, and my hair started falling out in clumps, but I didn't feel any pain. Instead, I felt a sense of relief. In the end, I didn't get to see my mother one last time. Although I knew this request was a bit excessive for her, who had already entered the monastery, I still selfishly prayed to God at the moment before I died, hoping to see my mother again. Perhaps God heard my prayer. In the endless darkness, a gentle voice sounded, "Ella White, do you want to see your mother again?" "Yes," I replied without hesitation. "Even if it's just for one day. Today, I'll let you be selfish once. I'll give you 3 days to see her." When I opened my eyes again, I saw the familiar corridor of the monastery, and the air was filled with a faint scent of incense. A gentle voice sounded in my ear, "Little monk, what are you staring at? Hurry up and come help." Standing in front of me was my mother. She was wearing a grey monk's robe, her hair neatly combed, a faint smile on her face, her eyes as gentle as water. I clenched my trembling hands, trying hard to hold back the tears swirling in my eyes. My throat choked. It took a long time to squeeze out a sentence. "Long time no see, Mom." It took me several minutes to finally comprehend my current situation. I had actually become that 9-year-old novice monk. Everything around me was unfamiliar. The monastery dormitory was bustling with energy, and the kitchen was even more lively. Some monks were chopping vegetables, their knives tapping rhythmically against cutting boards. Others were baking bread, filling the air with the scent of wheat. Some were skillfully preparing vegetable pies, while others worked methodically on fruit salads. If there was ever a picture of earthly warmth and vitality, this was surely it. I followed my mother into her designated area, where she was preparing vegetarian meals for the devotees. Her hands, once calloused, now seemed smoother than before. As clear water flowed over the cracks and healed scars on her fingertips, it felt as though it was washing away all the hardships of the past. "What are you staring at? Hurry up and wash the peas." My head was gently tapped again, not hard, but full of affection. Only now did I understand why the young novice seemed a bit slow-witted. It was probably from being tapped on the head like this so often by his mother. I clumsily imitated my mother's movements, washing the peas while listening to her explain the history of St. Mary's Monastery to the devotees assisting nearby. Since ancient times, monasteries have produced saints. Prayer is spiritual practice, cleaning is spiritual practice, and cooking is also spiritual practice, she said, her voice gentle yet firm. The vegetarian food here evolves with the times. It's not just simple bread and vegetables. Many dishes mimic the form and flavor of meat, satisfying devotees' cravings without violating religious principles. Take this vegetable and bean stew, for example. It's made with 18 ingredients, symbolizing reverence for God's creation, she explained patiently, pointing to the ingredients on the counter. Every component has its significance, none can be omitted. Just like in life, every experience we have and every person we meet is a destined part of our journey. I listened as she shared story after story, almost as if I were seeing her from 9 years ago, drifting freely through the river of time, telling me tales of the past under a sky full of stars. It turned out that after embracing this spiritual life, she hadn't completely severed her ties to the mortal world. Instead, she had found a new way to immerse herself in the warmth of earthly existence. After lunch, as the dining hall gradually emptied, my mother finally had a moment to rest. I sat beside her, carefully leaning my head against her arm, and asked softly, "Sister, aren't you tired of preparing vegetarian food every day?" She gently stroked my hair and replied in a tender tone, "How could I be? Every day, in this little corner of the world, I meet different people, have different conversations, and listen to different stories of past and present.